The night my son-in-law raised his hand, his mother smiled, and my daughter looked at the floor. I understood something with terrifying clarity. If I responded with emotion, we would lose everything. My name is Margaret Hail. I am 58 years old. I live just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a quiet neighborhood where people wave politely and pretend nothing dark ever happens behind closed doors. For nearly 3 decades, my career revolved around crisis management. I was the woman companies called when reputations were burning. When scandals threatened to destroy everything they had built, my job was never to panic. My job was to wait, observe, and move at exactly the right moment. I never imagined I would need those skills to save my own child. My daughter Lena was 33 that spring, intelligent, sharp-tongued in the best way, a city planner who believed that streets and parks could change how people treated one another. She had married Ethan Brooks 2 years earlier. On paper, he looked flawless, real estate investor, well-connected, generous donor at charity events. His mother Diane liked to make sure everyone knew that. The dinner was meant to be simple. A Sunday evening, a small remembrance for my late husband Thomas. Lena insisted on hosting. She said she wanted to cook his favorite meal, as though recreating that routine might keep grief from spreading further through our lives. When I arrived, the table was perfectly set. Candles, folded napkins, soft music in the background. Everything looked rehearsed, too rehearsed. Lena hugged me tightly, but her body was stiff. She wore long sleeves despite the warm Carolina evening. Her smile appeared on cue and vanished the moment she turned away. "Mom," she whispered, "I am glad you are here." Ethan greeted me with charm, polished to a mirror shine. Diane watched from across the room. Eyes sharp, lips already shaped with judgment. Dinner began politely. Conversation moved around safe subjects. Traffic, development projects, property values. Diane spoke the most. She always did. Every sentence ended with a lesson about discipline or standards, or how women today lacked resilience. Halfway through the meal, Lena reached for the serving dish. Her hand trembled. A spoon clinked against porcelain just loud enough to interrupt the rhythm of the table. Ethan's fork stopped midair. He looked at her slowly, deliberately, like a man deciding how far he could go. "Are you nervous?" he asked calmly, "or just careless as usual?" Lena opened her mouth, but the words never came. He stood, not abruptly, not in anger. He reached across the table and gripped her wrist hard enough that I watched her flinch. Then he leaned close and whispered something only she could hear. Diane laughed softly. "That is how women learn," she said lightly, lifting her wine glass. "Embarrassment works better than kindness." The room went still. Lena's eyes found mine for a fraction of a second. They were not asking for comfort. They were asking for permission. Permission to survive. I did not shout. I did not stand. I did not reach for my phone. I watched. I memorized every movement, every word, every witness. Because this was not the moment to act. This was the moment to prepare. And before that night was over, every one of them would underestimate me. That would be their first and most expensive mistake. Before Ethan entered her life, my daughter was not a woman who apologized for existing. Lena grew up in a house where voices were never raised to win arguments. Her father, Thomas, believed that disagreement was not a threat, but an invitation to understand. On Sunday mornings, he brewed coffee strong enough to wake the whole street, then sat at the kitchen table reading the paper while Lena challenged every opinion he held. He never dismissed her. He listened. He smiled. He taught her that her voice mattered. That lesson shaped everything she became. As a child, Lena rearranged the furniture in her bedroom because she believed that space affected mood. At 13, she wrote a letter to the city council about broken sidewalks near her school. At 21, she stood in front of a classroom and argued that neighborhoods could heal people if designed with dignity. She did not seek approval. She expected respect. Thomas used to say she walked like she knew where she was going, even when she did not. When she lost her father suddenly to a stroke, something essential cracked inside her. Grief did not weaken her intelligence, but it softened her boundaries. She became more willing to compromise, more willing to let others decide what was best for her. That was when Ethan appeared. They met at a regional planning forum in Raleigh. She told me he asked questions that sounded thoughtful. He praised her work. He said he admired ambitious women. When she talked about her projects, he nodded as though absorbing every word. Later, I would understand that attention was not admiration. It was assessment. At first, he encouraged her independence. He told her she inspired him. He sent flowers to her office. He remembered small details. He made her feel visible at a moment when grief had made her invisible to herself. Then the suggestions began. You work too hard, he would say, not as criticism but as concern. Those colleagues do not really appreciate you. Maybe that outfit sends the wrong message in my circles. Each sentence arrived softly. Each one removed a fraction of who she was. By the time I noticed something was wrong, Lena had already begun editing herself. She spoke more carefully. She paused before answering questions. She laughed less freely. When I asked how work was going, her answers grew shorter and rehearsed. I told myself she was adjusting to marriage. I told myself grief explained the change. I told myself that being a protective mother meant trusting my adult daughter to make her own choices. I was wrong. What I did not understand then was that control does not announce itself as a threat. It arrives as concern. It disguises itself as love. It waits until the person you trust most becomes the authority over how you think and speak and move. By the time Ethan suggested that Lena step back from certain projects because they conflicted with his social obligations, she believed she was choosing harmony. By the time Diane began commenting on Lena's posture and tone and usefulness, as a wife, Lena believed endurance was maturity. And by the time I watched my daughter lower her eyes at that dinner table, I understood something I had missed for far too long. The woman sitting in front of me was still my daughter, but she had been shrinking herself to survive. And no one shrinks without being pushed. Control does not begin with shouting. It does not begin with bruises. It begins quietly, almost politely, the way fog moves in without warning until you can no longer see where you started. After the wedding, Lena stopped calling me on her drive home from work. Those calls had once been our ritual. 10 minutes of laughter and small complaints and tiny victories. When I asked why, she said evenings were busy now. Ethan preferred quiet after work. He needed peace. Peace was his word for silence. At first, it sounded reasonable. Marriage required compromise, two lives adjusting. I told myself this was normal. I told myself not to interfere. Then I noticed how she dressed when she visited me. Softer colors, longer sleeves, no bold jewelry. When I asked about the change, she shrugged and smiled. Ethan liked things more understated. It was better for his image. That word came up often. He spoke about image when he asked her not to attend certain events without him. He spoke about image when he suggested she decline a leadership role. He spoke about image when he reminded her that powerful men preferred wives who knew when to step back. Every limitation came wrapped as advice. Every restriction was framed as protection. Diane reinforced it constantly. She would lean close and say things like a successful marriage means knowing your place, or men need to feel respected, especially men who provide. Lena began repeating those phrases without realizing she was doing it. I heard Diane's voice coming from my daughter's mouth. Softened, rationalized, made to sound reasonable. When I asked gently if she was happy, Lena hesitated before answering. Not long, just long enough. Of course I am, Mom. I am just tired. But tired does not hollow out a person's eyes. Tired does not erase their laughter. The real shift came when Lena stopped disagreeing. She used to argue for the joy of it. Now, when Ethan contradicted her, she nodded. When Diane criticized her cooking, she apologized. When decisions were made about their home and their future, Lena simply stepped aside. One night, I asked her directly if she felt safe. She looked startled, then briefly amused, then defensive. All in the space of a single breath. Why would you ask that? Ethan would never hurt me, she said it quickly. Like a line that had been practiced. I recognized that tone. I had heard it in corporate boardrooms. In crisis, calls where employees defended the very people destroying them. It was the voice of someone who had learned that resistance carried consequences. The most dangerous thing Ethan ever did was convince Lena that every conflict was her fault. If he was angry, she had pushed him. If he withdrew, she had disappointed him. If Diane criticized her, it was because she needed to improve. Responsibility became a burden she carried entirely alone. By the time she stopped sharing her fears with me, she believed fear itself was a kind of failure. She believed love required endurance. She believed marriage meant becoming smaller, and I, the woman trained to read patterns and anticipate collapse, realized too late that my daughter was living inside a crisis no one outside could see. The first time Ethan crossed a line, it did not happen in anger. That was what terrified me most when Lena finally told me. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, no raised voices. No argument loud enough to alarm anyone nearby, just a small mistake. A comment Lena made during a lunch with people connected to Ethan's family. She corrected a detail about a zoning project, gently, professionally, the way she had done hundreds of times before. Ethan smiled in public. He always did. In the car afterward, he did not raise his voice. He placed his hand on her knee and squeezed slowly and deliberately until her breath caught. He told her she had embarrassed him. He told her she needed to learn when to stay quiet. He told her that intelligent women often ruined good marriages by forgetting their place. That grip left a bruise the shape of his thumb. When Lena showed it to Diane later that week, trembling, unsure whether she was asking for help or permission to leave, Diane did not look surprised. She nodded. "That is how men establish order," she said calmly. "You should be grateful. He is correcting you early." My generation learned these lessons without complaint. She told Lena to wear longer skirts, to stop correcting him in public, to stop challenging authority. She showed her how to apply concealer so the mark would not show. Yellow first, then foundation, then powder. She spoke as though she were teaching a recipe. That was the moment I understood this was not simply a family problem. It was a system. After that, the incidents grew in careful increments. A shove disguised as urgency. A door slammed too close. A hand gripping her arm when she tried to walk away, always followed by remorse. Gifts, apologies, promises. Ethan cried convincingly. He spoke about stress and pressure and how much he loved her. Diane reinforced the cycle. She framed endurance as loyalty, pain as growth, silence as wisdom. Lena concealed the marks well. Long sleeves, careful makeup, explanations about clumsiness. She stopped coming to my house without arrangement. She stopped changing clothes near me. She stopped letting me see her fully. I noticed the way she flinched when voices rose, the way she scanned a room before speaking, the way she asked permission for things she had once decided without hesitation. One afternoon, I found her staring at her phone, tears moving silently down her face. When I asked what was wrong, she said nothing. When I pressed, she whispered, "I just need to be better." That sentence broke something in me. No woman decides she needs to become smaller unless someone has convinced her that her existence is a problem. The night of the dinner, when Ethan gripped her wrist and Diane laughed, I saw the entire structure clearly for the first time. The roles, the script, the approval of cruelty. They believed I was another woman who would freeze and excuse and normalize what was in front of her. They were wrong because while Lena had learned to survive by shrinking, I had spent my career dismantling systems that depended on silence. And as I sat at that table watching my daughter lower her eyes, I made a promise I did not speak aloud. This would be the last time anyone taught my child that pain was love. They simply did not yet know how much they were about to lose for believing otherwise. The moment I decided to act, Ethan and Diane sensed it. People like them always do. I did not announce my intentions. I did not threaten. I did not confront. I began quietly, the same way I had handled corporate disasters for years. I documented everything: dates, times, witnesses, small inconsistencies that pointed toward larger truths. I spoke to Lena carefully, making sure every step was hers and not mine. For 3 days, nothing visible happened. Then the counterattack began. It started with whispers. A colleague of Lena's stopped returning her calls. A woman she had worked with for years began avoiding her at professional events. A project she had been leading was reassigned without explanation. The justification was vague. Concerns about focus, image, stability, that word again. A week later, Lena was called into her supervisor's office. She was told it might be best if she took time away until her personal situation was resolved. They used the phrase mutual agreement as though pressure could be softened by polite language. She came home pale, apologizing to me for being a burden. I recognized the strategy immediately. They were isolating her. Then they came for me. An anonymous complaint was filed questioning my professional ethics. Old cases were suddenly revisited. Posts appeared online, carefully worded, suggesting I was a manipulative mother exploiting my daughter for personal leverage. Someone circulated the idea that I was exaggerating events, that Lena was unstable, that Ethan was a respected man being targeted unfairly. None of it was directly false. That was the sophistication of it. They twisted enough truth to poison perception. Diane's social network went to work, charity boards, private phone calls. The narrative spread quietly but efficiently. Lena was emotional and easily influenced. I was overbearing and obsessed with control. I had seen this approach before. Destroy credibility so that facts no longer land. Lena felt it immediately. She stopped checking her messages. She asked me one night if perhaps we should slow down, wait, give Ethan another chance. That was when I knew how close we were to losing her again. Because fear does not only live in bruises, it lives in exhaustion. She was tired of defending herself, tired of being observed, tired of explaining, tired of fighting people who smiled while cutting her down. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and held her hands, noticing how cold they were. "If you go back," I said calmly, "this will stop for a while." She looked up at me, eyes searching for reassurance. And then I continued, "It will get worse because they will know they can break you." She did not argue. She simply cried. That night I lay awake understanding something sobering. Ethan and Diane were not trying to win legally. They were trying to outlast us, and I was done letting them. The message arrived at 2:14 in the morning. No name, no subject line, just one sentence. "You need to look at what was hidden before Ethan learned how to hide himself." Attached was a secure link and a passcode that would expire within 24 hours. I did not wake Lena. I sat alone at my desk, the house quiet around me, my pulse steady in the way it only becomes when instinct takes over completely. This was not a threat. It was an invitation. The files opened one by one. Audio recordings first. Diane's voice. Unmistakable, calm, instructional, speaking to someone she called family. She spoke about managing situations, about shaping narratives, about how some women needed pressure to understand their limits. She laughed softly while explaining how to break resistance without leaving marks. Then came emails, old ones, years old. Messages Diane had sent to private contacts discussing Lena long before the wedding. She called her strong-minded, inconvenient, a liability if not managed early. My hands went cold, but the real weight waited in the final folder. A scanned police report dated 11 years earlier, the death of Ethan's father, ruled an accidental fall down a staircase in their previous home outside Asheville. Case closed quickly. No charges, no follow-up, except the report included handwritten notes in the margin from a junior investigator. Notes that had never made it into the official conclusion. Injury pattern inconsistent with a single fall. Multiple points of impact. Witness statements retracted after family intervention. The attachments continued. Medical records, photographs, a timeline that made my stomach drop. Ethan had grown up in a house where violence was normalized, where silence was enforced, where power was absolute. His mother had not only survived in that environment, she had perfected it. The final audio file confirmed what the documents suggested. Diane speaking late at night. Irritated, dismissive, he wanted to leave, she said. Men always think they can walk away once they are no longer useful. I taught him otherwise. There was a pause, a slow breath. Ethan does not remember everything. He does not need to. He learned what matters. I closed the file and leaned back, the weight of it pressing into my chest. This was no longer about my daughter's marriage. This was about a lineage of control. A woman who had shaped her son into an extension of her will. A system that did not break people by accident. It trained them. The sender revealed herself the next morning. A woman named Rachel, who had once worked in Diane's household years earlier. She had been dismissed quietly after asking too many questions. She had kept copies. She had waited until someone was finally ready to listen. I saw what she did to that girl, Rachel wrote. And I could not stay silent any longer. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift. Not relief, clarity, because now I understood what we were truly facing. Not simply an abusive man who lost control, but a legacy designed to destroy anyone who threatened it. And now that we had proof, the rules of everything were about to change. Lena asked to see Ethan the morning after I told her everything. Not out of hope, not out of fear, out of resolve. I need to look at him, she said quietly, and hear my own voice again. We met in a visitation room that smelled of disinfectant and old paper, the kind of space where constructed power disappears quickly. Ethan walked in thinner than I remembered, his confidence stripped back to something brittle. When he saw Lena, his face softened with something that looked like relief. He mistook her presence for forgiveness. He was wrong. She did not sit immediately. She stood across from him. Hands steady, posture straight, the woman she had once been returning slowly to her own body. I did not come here to negotiate, she said. I came to tell you the truth. Ethan began to speak, but she raised her hand. He stopped. That alone told me everything. He had never learned to listen to her until he no longer had any choice. You taught me to doubt my own instincts, she continued. You convinced me that love required obedience. You let your mother erase me piece by piece, and when I resisted, you punished me for it. He shook his head, eyes wet. He blamed stress. He blamed his upbringing. He blamed love that was too intense to contain. Lena did not flinch. I know what your mother did, she said. To your father, to you, to me. The room went completely still. She did not just raise you, Lena continued. She programmed you, and instead of breaking the pattern, you chose to become it. Ethan's shoulders fell. For a moment, I saw the child beneath the cruelty, the boy who had learned that survival meant compliance. But empathy does not remove responsibility. I am filing for divorce, Lena said. I am reclaiming my name, my work, my life, and you will never have access to me again. He reached across the table instinctively. The guard stepped forward. I loved you, Ethan whispered. No, Lena replied calmly. You needed control. Love does not require permission to exist, she stood. He pleaded, he cried, he promised change, but promises without accountability are simply another form of manipulation. When Lena turned and walked out, something broke in the room, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The spell was gone. Within 48 hours, the recordings and documents were in the hands of investigators. Charges escalated, restraining orders were enforced. Ethan violated one in a moment of panic and was arrested again. The carefully maintained image collapsed under the weight of evidence. Diane tried to bargain, tried to intimidate. It did not work, because systems built on silence collapse when confronted with truth spoken clearly and without hesitation. Lena did not look back, and for the first time since this had all begun, I watched her breathe freely. The cage had never been locked, it had only been believed, and belief once broken never regains its power. 5 years have passed since that dinner in Charlotte, the night when silence became first a weapon and then a shield. Lena lives downtown now in a small apartment filled with light, nothing extravagant, no heavy furniture, no locked doors. The windows stay open whenever the weather allows, as though air itself is part of her recovery. She works for a regional planning nonprofit, designing public spaces for communities that have been overlooked for too long. The work is quieter than her previous role, less prestigious on paper, but it gives her something she never had before. Peace. She laughs again, not carefully, not quietly, fully. She runs in the mornings. She cooks because she wants to, and not because someone is expecting it. She chooses her clothing without consulting an invisible jury. These details may seem small, but anyone who has lived under control understands they are victories. She is seeing someone now, slowly, on her own terms. A man who asks questions and listens to the answers. A man who does not confuse love with possession. When she told me that the first time he raised his voice in frustration, he stopped immediately and apologized without being prompted, I understood she was safe, not because he was without flaw, but because he was aware. As for me, I wrote this story because I promised myself I would not allow it to disappear into polite silence. Not for Lena, not for the women who reached out afterwards saying they recognized themselves in her hesitation, in her exhaustion, in her doubt, not for the mothers who wrote to say they were afraid to ask the questions that mattered most. Ethan is no longer part of our lives. His mother is no longer the shadow behind him. The system that once protected them did not fall all at once, but it cracked enough for light to enter. Sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes it simply removes the power to cause harm again. What survived was not revenge. What survived was truth. And truth has a way of rearranging everything it touches. Before I close, I want to leave you with 5 things this story taught us. First, abuse rarely begins with violence. It begins with control dressed as concern. Second, silence can be fear, but it can also be strategy when used with intention. Third, power protects abusers only until truth is documented and spoken clearly. Fourth, leaving may cost you comfort and stability and reputation, but staying may cost you your life. Fifth, healing does not mean forgetting. It means choosing yourself again and again and again. If this story reached something inside you, you are not alone. What lesson did you take from this story? And what city are you watching from? If you believe stories like this one matter, please like and share and comment below. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else finally say, "No more."